Hello, and welcome to our training webinar on the Congressionally Directed Melanoma Research Program, or known as the CDMRP. Today, we are joined by Amie Bunker, Program Manager for the Melanoma Research Program, also known as the MRP. She is going to provide some guidance for our clinician researcher community about how to apply to the CDMRP for funding. There are currently 4 grant opportunities with a pre-application deadline of September 14th, with a new grant opportunity focused on the rare melanoma subtypes. In total, the MRP is poised to award a total of $40 million in melanoma research funding. I would like to personally thank our MRF advocates for speaking with lawmakers at our annual advocacy days to encourage their sign-on for this increase in funding for melanoma research. The collective voices of our advocates is critical to the success of research that will lead to better treatments for all. As clinician researchers, I would also encourage all of you to share the MRF's resources with your own patient community by visiting melanoma.org. We also have a unique opportunity for patient advocates to participate as consumer reviewers in the CDMRP. The deadline for that application is August 15th. You can contact advocacy@melanoma.org for more information. And now it is my pleasure to turn it over to Amie Bunker to provide today's webinar. Amie?
Hi, thank you so much. Let me go ahead and share my screen. Okay, thank you again for that very generous introduction. And I am very happy to be here to talk to you about the currently open funding opportunities for the Melanoma Research Program. Again, like Kylie said, my name is Amie Bunker and I am the Program Manager for the program. For those of you who may not be familiar with who we are, we fall under the Department of Defense. We receive our money through directly from Congress to there. We fall under the Army, and as a whole, the Congressionally Directed Medical Research Programs manage about $2 billion a year in biomedical research funding. As an organization, we really try to focus on is transforming healthcare through innovative and impactful research. And we do this by responsibly managing collaborative research that discovers, develops, and delivers healthcare solutions for our service members, veterans, as well as the American public. A little bit about what separates us from some of the other funding agencies, and particular federal funding agencies, is that we really try to avoid duplication with other funding agencies. And that doesn't mean that we try to avoid funding the same proposals, which of course we do, but we also really do our own research and try to figure out the lay of the land for each of our programs and try to target the use of our fund to really meet unfunded areas and to try to close some of these gaps for our research and patient communities. When we first started as an organization, we consulted with the National Academies of Medicine, and based on their recommendations, we incorporated a 2-tier model for our application receipt and review process, and I'll go into some of those details in a few slides. But really, I think one of the things that makes us the most special and really stands out as unique for funders is that we incorporate consumers, which for us, those are patient advocates, survivors of diseases and injuries for the programs that we manage, and in some cases, even caregivers. And these consumers participate in each step along the way of our review process and really serve as our true north and make sure that the goals of the programs and the applications that we choose for funding are really going to do everything they can to meet the needs of those individual and unique communities. each program. As of FY22, there are 32 programs that are managed by CDMRP. Each one has its own vision setting meeting every year, and that's where stakeholders that represent the communities and discuss and come up with investment strategy, and really allows us to have rapid response and meet the needs of what can often be a changing landscape for the different programs. We do have a fair amount of flexibility with our funding and how we use the appropriations that we get every year. We don't have a set pay line. Instead, we base our funding recommendations off of the portfolio composition for each individual program, whether or not applications are meeting the intent of the funding opportunity, as well as the relative impact of one application to another and the strength of its technical merits. We try to be very transparent with who we are, what our goals are, what we're funding through outreach opportunities such as this webinar, as well as trying to keep our websites up to date as best as we can. And because we tend to be a smaller office, we are able to strive to keep our management costs low and really maximize the amount of those appropriation dollars that get put towards funding research. I mentioned a little bit about our program cycle and how it is two-tiered. And really, it starts off every year with the congressional appropriations. So once the budget is signed every fiscal year, that really kicks off our review cycle. It helps once we know how much money we're getting as a program. We have our vision setting and decide the investment strategy for how to best use those funds. We craft funding opportunities, which we call program announcements, and release them and start the application process, receipt process. In some cases, there are pre-applications that get screened, but in other cases, the application is received. It goes to our peer review, which is a scientific review process. Then it goes through our programmatic review, which is the step 2 of the two-tier process. And this is really where this panel decides if the applications are meeting the intent of the program, if we are diversifying the portfolio of the program appropriately, and really trying to make sure we're maximizing our dollars. I mentioned that consumers are an important part of every step of the way. So we do have patient advocates, the consumers, as part of our programmatic panel, and they do provide input into this vision setting process, any pre-application screening, and their views are weighed equally with all the other members of the programmatic panel in making these final funding decisions. Additionally, during the peer review process, where the applications are being reviewed on their scientific merit and other criteria that I'll describe later, they get to provide their own input on particular aspects of the project. So really getting their full input received. Once the applications are recommended for funding, they enter into our active award management phase, and we keep an eye on them through award closeout and beyond, and really try to keep track to the best of our abilities of any of the most exciting and impactful projects and see where they go in the future. Specifically for the Melanoma Research Program, we have existed as our own program since FY19. Prior to FY19, we were a topic area under the peer-reviewed cancer research program. So since then, as you can see, we've really grown as a program fairly quickly, thanks to the efforts of the patient community. And as shown here, we do have $40 million to spend for this fiscal year. As a program, we set our vision as preventing melanoma initiation and progression. And I'll talk a little bit more about this in a few slides. And we hope to achieve this vision by promoting earlier intervention to enhance mission readiness and diminish the melanoma burden on service members, veterans, and the American public. I will pop this up on the last slide as well, but this and a lot more information that applicants might find useful can be found on our program's website. Some additional sources that you'll be able to find on that website is a melanoma landscape that our program put together for FY21. So a lot of this information is still going to be very relevant. And it really gives a pretty thorough overview of the lay of the melanoma field and clinical practices, gaps that are less well funded in melanoma and patient care, all of the references, of course, that went into it. And like I said, you can find this as a link on our website. Another important document and information that all applicants are going to need to be aware of and familiar with is our challenge statement and focus areas. This is a critical part of every application that we receive. It is available as a standalone document on our website and is summarized the key points in all of our funding opportunities. The core of what the challenge statement is really challenging the research community, the clinicians, to do everything they can to not just prevent melanoma initiation, but also to stop the progression of melanoma once it's begun. Typically, people think of melanoma prevention and they think of sunscreen and wearing protective clothing, staying in the shade, and all of those things, which are very important, but that's just one piece of the prevention puzzle. Melanoma is made up of various different stages. And although not every case of melanoma will progress through all of these stages, they are still important to consider. So once a melanoma has initiated, and either through UV exposure, other environmental exposures, genetic risk factors, whatever the case may be, once this starts, what can we do to prevent this stage from progressing any further? Once there is a primary melanoma identified, what can we do to make sure that we prevent the progression to metastasis? So that's really what we're trying to do as a program. What we're trying to accomplish is to shift this paradigm of what's considered prevention and really broaden the scope, and challenge people to take a look at what their current research efforts are, and maybe not completely, we don't want people to dismiss their research and be like, oh, well, I'm not doing prevention research, but really take a closer look at what you're doing, why you're doing it, and could you apply your research to tackle any of our focus areas that we have outlined, and to try to help researchers think about the challenge statement and apply their research to meeting this need for a broadened scope prevention. We have outlined 7 focus areas. They can be categorized as either understanding risk factors, improving detection and diagnosis, and looking at mechanistic studies to understand the underlying principles. So once you understand these underlying principles, what can you do to manipulate or transform them to apply to this challenge and make them prevention focused. Additionally, we have what makes up our 7th focus area is this renewed emphasis in understanding and investing in rare melanoma research. And there's so many unknowns with so many of the different subtypes, whether they're acral, mucosal, ocular, and other ones that may meet this definition, pediatric. There's so many unknowns that we actually will accept research of any time. So not necessarily prevention, but improved treatments, since there's so few options that are proven to work for these different subtypes, understanding metastasis, really anything that is rare melanoma focused, we want to receive those applications. And these focus areas, there are 7 of them on the screen. they apply to all of our funding opportunities, with the exception of the Rare Melanoma Focus Program Award, which I'll explain the nuance in a few slides. This is just a quick snapshot of what those 4 current funding opportunities that are open encompass. We do have our Melanoma Scholar Award. This is the 2nd year that we are offering this. It's to support early career investigators who want to establish themselves as the next generation of leaders in melanoma research and patient care. They must have a faculty level appointment. Postdoctoral fellows are not eligible for this award, but the early career investigators must be within 7 years of their terminal degree. And really, aside from joining the academy, the emphasis of this mechanism is to fund impactful research and develop those careers. They are for 3 years and a maximum direct cost of $550,000. We have a mid-career Accelerator Award. We've been offering this for a few years now. And this is really acknowledging that sometimes investigators age out of what's considered an early career investigator, and they don't have access to some of these protected pools of funds, either at within the MRP or NIH, but maybe they haven't quite gotten so far into their careers to truly be able to compete with the established investigators for those funds. So this is meant to target those people that need a little extra support. They've already done some great things in melanoma, but they just need a little bit more funding to get them over that next big hump. And so this award is for those assistant professors or associate professors that are more than 7 years after their first faculty appointment. So anyone that's an instructor level is not eligible for this, or anyone who is a full professor or equivalent are not eligible for these awards. These are really for those mid-career people that already have done some work in melanoma and really just need a little extra boost to get them over and into that truly established realm. We are offering a Team Science Award. Again, we've offered this for a few years now, but what we did this year was really try to broaden the scope and support either new or existing partnerships between 2 or 3 investigators who are coming together to work on a single project, and really are trying to emphasize synergism and bringing people together who have different areas of expertise, but those differences can really be used to achieve things that neither one would be able to do on their own. We also increased the funding level for this up to $1 million in direct costs over 3 years. And then our big new, exciting for us, funding opportunity this year is this Focus Program Award for Rare Melanomas. It's a little unique from the concept of a Team Science Award. So although it is still bringing together 2 to 3, what it's doing is there will be one PI that is in charge of the entire effort, and they will be working with 1 to 2 other project leaders and bring together 2 to 3 individual distinct projects, but those projects together are working towards understanding and addressing an overarching question that is relevant to rare melanomas. This overarching question can be related to a single rare melanoma. So each of the 2 or 3 individual projects can be working on understanding different aspects of acral melanoma, or perhaps investigators want to come together and address an overarching challenge that is applicable to multiple types of rare melanoma. So perhaps identifying biomarkers that would better stratify risk for ocular, acral, and mucosal melanoma. So really, there's a lot of flexibility with that, as long as the core of the research is focused on rare melanomas. I did mention, so this is the only funding opportunity where you don't pick your focus area because the focus area is selected for you, rare melanomas. Each of these three other ones, the investigators must address the overarching challenge about prevention and must choose at least one with the option of a second focus area, saying how their research is addressing that focus area. Again, that one of those focus areas is rare melanoma. And so if someone's coming in and just wants to apply for a mid-career Accelerator award doing rare melanoma research, that's perfectly acceptable and meets the intent of that mechanism. I will also want to point out here that for each of these, there is only a requirement to submit a letter of intent for the pre-application process. There is no requirements to be invited for a full application. So there is no screening. You just submit your letter of intent. I'll explain a little bit more about that process in the next slide, a couple of slides. But investigators do not have to wait for an invitation to submit their full application. Before getting into some of the other details about each of these mechanisms, I wanted to provide an overview of where you even find our full funding opportunities and a quick overview of our application submission and review processes. There are 3 places that an investigator can go to find our funding opportunities. You can go to the CDMRP website, and you can see here at the top a tab for funding opportunities, or a box on the lower left corner of the website that also investigators can click to and navigate towards our open funding opportunities. They are available on ebrap.org. Again, funding opportunities and forum tab will be at the top of the page. And finally, they are posted on grants.gov. So if you just go to the search box and type in CFDA 12.420, the CDMRP funding opportunities will become available. There are 2 documents associated with every funding opportunity. There is the program announcement, which is unique to each individual funding opportunity. So this one I chose as an example, this year's Melanoma Academy Scholar Award. This is the first page, and important dates are right here front and center. Again, as Kylie mentioned, the pre-application letter of intent deadlines, September 14th, and then the full application deadline is October 5th, as well as our estimated peer and programmatic review dates. The second document are our general application instructions, and this is, as the name implies, general to any funding opportunity offered by CDMRP. It gives you some general tips for success, gives you how to make sure your organization is set up to submit documents for the application process, and how you get your registration requirements all straightened out, and what you need to do for submitting the different package components. This could be potentially of interest for anyone who is an applicant at an international institution, organization, university, whatever. Applicants from international organizations are eligible for any of these awards as long as they can access all of the .mil and .gov websites, because those are necessary to go through the appropriate submission portals, and that they make sure that their institution has the appropriate registration numbers set up for them. And so that's where they would find all of that information. Submission is, we use a pretty standard process for all of our programs. All funding opportunities, all PAs, use a 2-step process. So all applications have a required pre-application step. The pre-application is either a letter of intent, which is what the 4 current MRP opportunities utilize. If you are familiar with other programs or previous funding opportunities from the MRP even, sometimes pre-application is a pre-proposal that gets screened, and then applicants must receive an invitation to submit a full application. Not going to worry about this today because that's not applicable. Again, just need to worry about submitting that letter of intent for any of the 4 opportunities. So this is submitted via eBRAP. The second step of the submission process is getting that full application submitted via grants.gov. You must submit a pre-application in order to be eligible to submit a full application. If you miss this letter of intent deadline, you will not be able to submit your full application. So both steps are very important. You don't need to wait for an invitation to submit, but it must be submitted. And just a quick overview of what's the difference between a letter of intent and the pre-proposal. Again, so the IDEA award, if you are familiar with those either from this year or past years, does have a pre-proposal where it's a 1-page narrative that lets us know what focus area your project would apply to and a brief overview of what the project would entail. It can include bio sketches, other supporting documents as requested. The pre-proposals are reviewed by our Programmatic Panel, and applicants do receive an invitation to submit a full application at the end of the pre-application screening. But again, that's not important for what's left open. The letter of intent, it really is just that you state that you intend to apply. Some of the letters might ask you for collaborators or conflicts of interest, those types of things that help us really just with our reviewer recruitment. The letter of intent isn't due, I think it's only like 2-3 weeks before the full application, but that's still just enough to help us get a head start on some of these other administrative tasks while you're finishing up with your full applications and getting those submitted. As I said, all 4 of the currently open funding opportunities use letters of intent. We have the 2-tiered review process, introduced that earlier, where we have peer review and programmatic review. These are partnership, they are not redundant. What we have is that the first tier is peer review. And this is really our technical assessment of the project. We're doing a deep dive into the science. Is it feasible? Is everything well described, well justified? Does the rationale make sense? I will show you some examples of some peer review criteria to really kind of hone in that point. But these are at the stage where the applications are held up to a golden standard. There's no comparison of one application to another at this stage. It's really just looking at how well does the individual application meet the criteria that have been outlined in the program announcement. Peer reviewers are comprised, again, like I mentioned, of consumers. They can be clinicians and they can be researchers. Whatever areas of expertise are most appropriate for reviewing those proposals. We don't have standing panels, so we generally have probably about 20 to 40% turnover every year of our peer reviewers. So one question that we get asked a lot is if there is a process for resubmissions. And the answer really is you can resubmit if you have an application one year, it doesn't get funded, but you get your summary statement with the strengths and weaknesses outlined on it. And you want to address those weaknesses and submit the application again the following year. That's perfectly allowed if that funding opportunity is offered again. However, that's going to be a whole new submission. So won't necessarily have the same reviewers. It won't be, no one's going to have access to the prior year's application. And so every year, every application is really just being reviewed with a fresh perspective. The identities of the reviewers are not known to the applicants. And in fact, contact between the applicants, reviewers, and program staff to get input about an application is not allowed. This here is an example of what the peer review criteria look like. Every funding opportunity has this section for peer review, where the criteria is broken down into scored criteria and unscored criteria, what is being looked at, and to what extent. These are exactly what the reviewers are looking at when they're reviewing each application. So they're looking to assess to what extent, again, this is from this year's Melanoma Academy Scholar Award, to what extent is the scholar's record of accomplishment demonstrate their potential to become a melanoma leader? To what extent were the hypothesis and objectives well described, and so on and so forth. These peer review criteria really serve as basically a rubric to you, the applicant. And if you, as you're putting together your application materials, you should absolutely be coming to this review criteria and going down each of these criteria points and making sure that you've addressed them to the best of your abilities in your application materials. And an important part, I mentioned the peer reviewers, some of them are consumers, and some of the application materials that you're asked to submit, and specifically the lay abstract, as well as impact statements. Applicants are instructed to write those using language readily understood by someone without a scientific or medical background. That's because these are really key documents that are used by our consumer reviewers. And since they have an equal say in some of these criteria and in programmatic review when the funding recommendations are made, it's important that you make your case to them as well as the researchers and clinicians that are reviewing your application. The second tier of review is our programmatic review. And this is where the comparison aspect comes in. So our programmatic reviewers use the summary statements that were compiled during the technical review of the application, and they look at also how well the application is meeting the intent of the mechanism, how relevant is the project to what the program is trying to accomplish, and that trying to balance, again, what we've already funded to what we have in front of us, and making sure that we are trying our best to, we have set, for one example, we have 7 focus areas. So we're trying to make sure that if we have full, strong applications for each funding, for each focus area, we make sure that we try to fund it appropriately across each area. These are completely different panel from the peer review, so there is no overlap. You're not going to have someone who peer reviewed your application also having a say during programmatic review. Those are 2 separate panels, 2 separate processes. However, the programmatic panel is still made of a blend of consumers, clinicians, and researchers. And if particular areas of expertise are needed, we may bring in ad hoc reviewers as necessary. The programmatic review criteria is listed in the program announcement right under the peer review criteria. So again, these are things to make sure you're familiar with as you're putting together your documents, making sure that the award information. So how do you know if you're meeting the intent of the award mechanism? Every funding opportunity has a section near the top that's called award information. And that is where we are telling you what we're trying to accomplish with that award. So become familiar with that section and make sure that, if we say for a Team Science Award, that we're trying to build, encourage multidisciplinary, synergistic team science, then really make sure your application demonstrates how you've put together your team to meet that need, those kinds of things. Same thing with the impact. We have an impact statement that has some instructions in the program announcement of what we're looking for in that impact statement. So don't, if you think you've just going to address that in the project narrative and you don't pay much attention to the actual impact statement, that might be a mistake. So make sure that you're putting the information for the application where we're asking you to put it. And so the appropriate people are seeing the appropriate information. This is a list of our current programmatic panel for FY22. Please, please, please do not include any of these people in your application. That is grounds for removing your application from further consideration. And so this list is also posted on our MRP website. So you don't memorize it here today. Please go look it up. If you need a letter from a department head and one of these people happens to be your department head, ask them who else you should get to sign that letter. So those kinds of things, it's very important. And just moving on now, coming back to using what I just told you about the general application process and coming back to our specific mechanisms, just to hit some of the highlight in how each of these funding opportunities are a little different in what we're trying to accomplish with them. As I mentioned, this Melanoma Academy Scholar Award, it's the second year we're offering it. The critical components that are described in more detail in the funding opportunity award information section is really the scholar and their potential to contribute to the melanoma field, the quality of their chosen career guides, how committed and how well they articulate their commitments to the Melanoma Academy, the thoughtfulness that's applied to developing a career development plan. And at the end of the day, again, we are still funding research. So the quality and the potential impact of that research is just as important as the career development aspects. Outlined in the peer review criteria section will be the score criteria is, again, the scholar, the strength of the research and strategy and feasibility, and so on. There are unscored criteria, but again, they can, even though they're not scored, they could still impact the general impression of the reviewers. And the programmatic review criteria. You'll see over the next few slides that there's a lot of similarities in this programmatic review criteria from mechanism to mechanism, but still make sure that you're paying attention and seeing what they're going to be focusing on. If you would like to find out more about our Melanoma Academy, we do have a feature describing the FY21 recipients of the Academy leadership and the first 2 scholars that were funded through this mechanism. This again is the Mid-Career Accelerator Award. Again, the critical components, which are explained in more detail in the award information of the funding opportunity, is the PI and their ability to become a leader in the melanoma field, the impact of the proposed research. Preliminary data are required for this funding opportunity, and they must be in melanoma. So if you're trying to propose melanoma biomarker study, then your preliminary data must be based off of melanoma specimens of some variety. And a continuity plan. And this is really meant to challenge the applicants to explain how are they going to use this award to establish themselves as leaders in melanoma research, and how are they going to use this award to advance the field in either research and or patient care. So that's the intent of the continuity plan. And here again are just the highlights of the peer review criteria, what is being looked at, both scored and unscored. Again, the research strategy and feasibility, the impact, research outcomes plan. For the programmatic review criteria, again, adherence to the challenge statement and focus areas. How well do you make your case that this project is meeting those intentions? How well do you articulate your potential to be leader in melanoma? And as always, impact is very important. Our Team Science Award, as I mentioned, was updated for this year. So we really tried to broaden the scope. There, at the core of it, we really do want this to be a multidisciplinary team that comes together. Each partner having a true intellectual stake into the project that's proposed and the work that's being done. We do not want to see an application where one partner is doing all of the work and the other partner is just providing specimens. To us, that's not the spirit, that's not the intent of this mechanism. We want to see true collaboration across fields. We are encouraging a broad range of studies to be proposed under this mechanism. So translational data where a team has access to clinical trial specimens and are analyzing those. Data science, bioengineering, so development of new tools, new screening, new diagnostics, so forth. Research into melanoma health inequities and or disparities, or really anything if it's any other hypothesis driven multidisciplinary research that is still meeting addressing the challenge statement and addressing one of our focus areas. So we just really want to emphasize the multidisciplinary nature of this. And preliminary data are still required for this funding opportunity as well, but it does not necessarily have to be in melanoma. So if there's data from one of the laboratories in another cancer area or another technology project, and you can bring that to show feasibility to melanoma, that's perfectly acceptable for the Team Science Award. I've highlighted the peer review criteria once again: research, personnel, impact, programmatic review, addressing challenge statement and focus areas, the relative synergism and potential of the collaboration and impact of the science. And finally, our Focus Program Award in rare melanomas. I mentioned this before, that really the core of this is an overarching question that is relevant to some facet of rare melanoma, either research and or patient care. Pilot clinical trials are allowed in this mechanism. This is the only mechanism where applicants could propose a clinical trial. The projects, it should be 2 or 3 individual projects. It's not meant to be where the success of one project is dependent on the completion of another. They are supposed to be independent, standalone, but still coming together to somehow address a single question. There will be a milestone meeting where the research team presents to our programmatic panel and other potential program staff about how the project is going and addressing if any challenges come up and how those are being mitigated. Something new that we're including with this funding opportunity, it is optional, but we wanted to put it out there as a possibility of including rare melanoma advocates in the planning and execution of the Focus Program Award. We have, similar to what we've done with the Academy, we do have highlights posted on our Melanoma Research Program website, where we go into some more information about how investigators, how applicants might go ahead and tackle this for such a project. We provide some references for the types of ways to integrate patient advocates into cancer research. And so I strongly encourage anyone who's interested in applying to this opportunity to please check out that feature, as well as reading carefully through the award information of the funding opportunity, as you should do for any of these mechanisms. The peer review criteria, again, this, if you're interested in this award, should be paid close attention. There are some scored criteria for the overall program. So how well do you present the overarching question and implementation strategy? Is the team coming together appropriate for the proposed research, those kinds of things. But there is also separate scored criteria for each of the individual research projects that focus on the the research strategy and feasibility. If a clinical trial is proposed, the clinical strategy. And again, our tried and true programmatic review criteria. Again, adherence to the intent of the award mechanism. We don't want to see anything submitted to this opportunity that is not researching rare melanomas, and the impact of this proposed project. So again, I strongly encourage anyone who's interested in this to go ahead and check out this feature on our website. Coming down to the home stretch, and just wanted to reiterate a few general strategies for success. It's really important to plan ahead. We're getting into August, and the deadline for the LOIs is coming up in middle of September. So really make sure that the time doesn't slip away and you're starting to pull together your teams and reading through these documents, making sure you have the appropriate registrations and accounts set up, those kinds of things, because sometimes things can take time if you don't have them in place. So plan accordingly, read documents carefully. Pay attention to grantsmanship. I heard this a while ago and I really like it. That your grant is your TED Talk. So be clear in what you're proposing to do, and be clear and strong in your justification for why you think you can achieve what you're proposing. Be clear, don't use jargon. We have a diverse people that are going to be reading through this. So not everyone who reads your application knows that particular branch of science as well as you do. So make sure you're applying to a good audience, and review your documents once you're about to submit them. Check them again just to be sure. The intent of the opportunity is very important. And again, just a reminder, reading through the whole program announcement is important, but to really get to this intent, make sure you understand and read carefully the award information section of these funding opportunities, because that's where you're going to really get the uniqueness of why that mechanism was created. And it's really on you, the applicant, to make sure you're telling your story and defending your case for how you're meeting that intent. Impact. I think I've said that many times throughout this talk, but that's just because that's how important it is. Cool science is cool, but we exist because patients, melanoma survivors, melanoma patients, caregivers, people who have lost loved ones to melanoma are invested in this program, and they want this money to have an impact. They want this money to be used to make a difference in the lives of people currently fighting melanoma and those who may be diagnosed in the future. So that's critically important to us as a program. And we want to impart that importance onto our applicants as well. And last, but certainly not least, is feasibility, and really clearly articulating what resources, what skills the team has to achieve the project, and having that be clear. So plan, keep impact forefront, and pay attention to the intent. A few final pitfalls to avoid. Again, do not include the programmatic panel in any part of your application. Make sure you check for page limits. If you're converting documents to PDF, check the page limits again. In some cases, it may just be that extra pages are removed. In other cases, such as the project narratives, if those run over, that could be grounds for removing your application from further with consideration. So again, being mindful of those outlines and guidance. The deadlines are critically important. There's almost never any reason to extend a deadline. Literally, if the only times I've seen it happen are such as a hurricane comes through and right around application deadline, then maybe applications submission for everybody would be pushed back, but on a case-by-case basis, that doesn't really happen. And again, submit your project narrative and your budget. Be very careful when you're submitting those, because once they are submitted, they cannot be modified during the verification period. So cross your T's and dot your I's. I know I've given you a lot of information to look through, but please visit our MRP website, which is this link at the top. A lot of this information can be found there in more detail. If you're interested in seeing what other types of projects the MRP has funded over the last few years, you can go to the CDMRP search page, select the Melanoma Research Program, and then search the awards, and you'll get links to all of the technical and lay abstracts from those previously funded projects. And then we do have some other webinar series available to you. The one at the top link is, those webinars were recorded in 2019, but most of the information in there is still pretty applicable about walking you through each section of a program announcement and how to read it and how to use that information. So if you've never applied to CDMRP or just would like to understand those documents and the processes a little bit better, I encourage you to go check out these couple of links. So with that, I really thank you very much for your attention and your interest in applying to the Melanoma Research Program. Thank you very much.